All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, so a note to our internet audience watching at home. If you're interested in tonight's book, we can ship it to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. Just call the number on your screen. This evening, Books and Books, in collaboration with Slow Food Miami and Les Dames d'Escoffier Miami, is very happy to present Ms. Nancy Harmon Jenkins and her new book, Virgin Territory, Exploring the World of Olive Oil. Tonight she's going to be in conversation with local cooking teacher, cookbook author, and food and travel writer, Ms. Carol Kotkin. And here to introduce Nancy and Carol, please welcome to the podium a member of both Slow Food Miami and Les Dames d'Escoffier Miami, our friend Ms. Joanne Bander.
Thank you. Welcome to this event. I want to thank Books and Books and Mitchell Kaplan. I want to and Christine Nosti, who handles all of these events. And of course, I think most of us figured out this was the best bookstore anywhere a long time ago. We didn't need Publishers Weekly, which made Books and Books its #1 bookstore in the United States. It was announced about 10 days ago, I believe. We also thank our co-sponsors, Slow Food Miami and Les Dames d'Escoffier, both of which are deeply connected to the local food movement, to using their membership base and the funds they raise through their events to help grow edible gardens for children, to help educate future chefs and farmers ad infinitum. Les Dames is dedicated to women in the culinary world. Slow Food is a very big membership-based organization and welcomes your membership, and you can find them online. If you are part of that culinary world, Les Dames also would very much like to hear from you. How does one introduce someone who, when you Google Nancy Harmon Jenkins on olive oil, you are informed that there are about 39,100 results in 57 seconds. That's what happened today when I went looking for something. Suffice it to say that she's an acknowledged authority on olive oil and the Mediterranean diet, a compatible twofer. She fell in love with olive oil when she bought a farm in eastern Tuscany some 14 years ago that came with a dozen or so overgrown and neglected olive trees. Nancy's approach to writing about olive oil goes beyond its taste and qualities to an explanation of its history and cultural connections, the base for her writings on myriad subjects. Example, the Khufu boat at the pyramids. And she includes in her book magnificent photographs, vignettes, and delicious, easy-to-make recipes with origins from throughout the olive oil-producing regions of the world. She's a food writer with a passionate interest in Mediterranean cultures and cuisines, sustainable agriculture, and farm-to-market connections. Besides authoring half a dozen highly acclaimed cookbooks, with another on its way, she told us at dinner tonight in October, on pasta with her chef daughter, Sarah Jenkins, who's in New York. She writes for the New York Times, Saveur, and Food and Wine, and divides her time between her farmhouse outside of Cortona, Italy, and Midcoast, Maine. Conversing with Nancy will be Caroline Kotkin, a founder of Les Dames d'Escoffier of Miami. She is manager of the Ocean Reef Cooking School, cooking teacher, cookbook author, and food writer and travel writer, syndicated food columnist with the Miami Herald, co-host of Food and Wine Talk on SouthFloridaGourmet.com, and co-author of Miami, Tempting Tropical Taste for Home Cooks Everywhere. If you'd like more intense experiences with either Carol or Nancy, you might enroll in one of Carol's cooking classes or travel with Nancy this fall in Sicily. There is also a slow food gathering tomorrow night with a few places available, and there should be brochures here before we're done tonight. And you're welcome. It's a beautiful home in South Miami, and the food will be from recipes in Nancy's cookbook. There will be about 10 minutes from Q&A after Nancy and Carol finish talking with each other. Please join me in welcoming them.
Old times, Nancy.
It is, isn't it?
Wonderful.
And a favorite subject. It's a question. Joanne talked about my cooking classes, and it's a question that I get all the time about olive oil.
Yeah.
Even though everyone has a few bottles in their kitchen and they're cooking with it all the time, but you're the best person to ask all the things we want to know
Well,
about
the
olive
first
oil.
thing I think people want to know, the first thing people ought to know is that it isn't just olive oil. It's, first of all, it's extra virgin olive oil. And then when you get to extra virgin, that isn't the end of the discussion either. There's a whole lot more than that. There are different qualities of olive oil. There's good olive oil, there's bad olive oil. There's olive oil that has a very pronounced flavor, a very, what I call a very rustic flavor. There's olive oil that has very delicate flavors. They can all be used in different ways. I like to say that it's the most misunderstood ingredient in the American kitchen.
So how can you help us to understand it a little bit better? I mean, there's so many olive oils on the shelves in the grocery store. How do we know what to choose? And what does extra virgin really mean? I want to talk about that.
Okay, well, let's start with that, because that has a very simple, straightforward definition that doesn't really mean anything. Extra virgin olive oil is produced, and this is the definition provided by the International Olive Council, which is a more or less official body that kind of supervises the promotion of olive oil around the world. So that definition is extra virgin olive oil is produced by purely mechanical means. You can't use any kind of solvents to extract the oil from the olives. So the olives are picked, they're crushed, they're put into mats of some sort that extract the oil from them, and that's it. Nothing else happens to it. It also is supposed to have perfect flavor and perfect aroma. I always have a lot of problems with the descriptive perfect, because I think one person's perfect is another person's disgusting, and maybe only God can be perfect. That's also another aspect of it. But perfect flavor and perfect aroma is part of the definition. And then there are two other parameters for extra virgin olive oil that are kind of legal parameters. It must have no more than 0.8% free oleic fatty acid. This does not mean that the oil tastes or doesn't taste of acid. It has nothing to do with an acid flavor. What it means is that free oleic fatty acid is oleic acid that has been released from its chemical bond. So you can't really taste it, except you know when you taste a bad olive oil that it's probably very high in that free oleic fatty acid. And the other parameter, and I have a really hard time with this because I don't know what it means, 20 MEP of peroxide. I have no idea what MEP means, and nobody has ever been able to tell me. But it's a measure of peroxide in the oil. And peroxide, like free oleic fatty acid, is a measure of rancidity. So what you're trying to do is to figure out how rancid this olive oil is. And if it's more rancid than those parameters allow, then it's no longer considered extra virgin.
So in the United States, though, there's no assurance that what you buy that says extra virgin on the bottle is in fact extra virgin.
Well, there's no assurance that what you buy in Italy says extra virgin is actually extra virgin either. There's a lot of controversy about this. We like to think that us poor Americans are the victims of the olive oil, the big oil, let's call it. We're the victims of big oil. That if you go to Spain or to Italy or to the south of France, you will have wonderful lush oil. You won't. You'll have just as much disgusting oil as you have in this country. What you do have there, however, is an opportunity to taste some really good oil. So, I've really pushed you into a corner. I've told you that you can't get any good oil, that you don't know how to judge it, that if you do know how to judge it, your judgment is wrong. What are you going to do when you go into the supermarket? First thing you do when you go into the supermarket is turn around and walk out. Because I do not believe that in most supermarkets in this country you can get good extra virgin olive oil. I think most of it is, if it started out as extra virgin, it's no longer extra virgin by the time it gets to the shelves because it's been very badly handled. So how are you going to go about getting good extra virgin?
Didn't you recommend Kirkland in your book?
I did.
Costco?
Yeah. But you can go to a Costco where the Kirkland's being badly handled too. What happens is the producer makes a really fine oil and puts it in a bottle and sends it to the United States or sends it from California to the East Coast. It gets here and it gets put up on a high shelf underneath bright lights in a very warm part of the store, and it suffers from that, and it starts to go rancid as a result. Olive oil is, in a certain sense, it's a very fragile and delicate substance, and light and high heat, by which I mean anything really over about 70 degrees, and just the general atmosphere will tend to reduce the quality of the oil.
And if you do get a really good oil and you bring it home, then you have to keep that in mind.
Yes, you do. You have to store it. And I'm fortunate, I live in Maine where it hasn't stopped snowing for the last 4 months. And I keep my olive oil in an unheated pantry, which is a great place to keep it, in a dark cupboard. A cupboard with a door on it that closes, and nobody's allowed in that cupboard except me. I think most people will be buying oil in 1 liter quantities, but you can often find oil, especially was a gentleman here in the store was asking me about oil from Greece. Some of the oil from Greece is very, very good quality, and you can buy it in 3 liter or 5 liter tins at an interesting price. Take it home, tap off half a liter, half a quart, to keep in the kitchen for your daily use, and keep the rest of it stored in that unheated, darkened cupboard in the pantry, or down in the basement. Or
no basements here.
No basements here. It's a real problem. Somebody always asks if you should store olive oil in the refrigerator. And what I usually say is, look, if you've got some really fine olive oil, and you live in Florida, and you have to be away all summer, and you don't want to leave the air conditioning on, yes, then I probably would store it in the refrigerator. But apart from that, it isn't really the best place to store it.
So are there more than, if you have this $30 bottle of oil, am I going to use it to fry a cutlet? Or am I just going to use it to
a $30 bottle I'd
my
probably mostly use as a garnish or for salad dressing.
finishing?
But I would fry an egg in it, because an egg fried in really good olive oil absorbs a great deal of flavor from the olive oil. The veal cutlet won't absorb so much, but the egg will be that much better from frying in the olive oil.
And what will you fry the cutlet in?
Oh, I'd take a lesser oil, an oil that doesn't cost $30 a bottle. It maybe costs $15 or $20 a bottle. And that Kirkland probably is a very good example of that. Another great example of that, and I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this, I hope. California producers are really getting involved in major production of olive oil. There have always been boutique producers of olive oil, like McAvoy Ranch is a very well-known brand. But now you have something called California Olive Ranch, which in fact is owned by the Spaniards.
And that's reasonable.
It's very reasonable. It's very well made. It's not a great oil. Somebody said to me several years ago, somebody in California said, this is a really good oil, but nobody is ever going to write poetry about it. And that's absolutely true.
But you can fry with it.
But you can fry with it. Another one that I love that's just starting up now is called Seka Hills.
I love it.
Seka. And one of the reasons why I love oils that have
spout?
stories. I love the spout, yes. But I also love
you open it up and there's a little spout.
it pops up,
Pops
yes,
up.
so you can dribble it easily. The other thing I love about it is the backstory, because it's made not by a bunch of Italians who bought land in California, but by a bunch of Native American Indians, the Yocha Deha Indian tribe in the Capay Valley in California, who have been very forward-thinking and early on established a casino, which became very popular. They make a great deal of money out of their giant casino, and they invested all in agriculture. So they're making wonderful olive oil, wonderful wine. They're raising organic vegetables for various restaurants in the Bay Area. And it's great. I mean, who knew that Native Americans would be making olive oil? That's progress.
Well, talking about when I read her book, I read with Post-its, and these are all the recipes I want to make. And I actually made the cover one. It was really good. Everybody loved it too. So let's talk a little bit about the uses.
About cooking with olive oil.
Yeah, you have also a whole chapter on poaching fish in olive oil.
I think it's a great thing to do. In fact, we did that for our Easter lunch this year. We had a small salmon that we poached in olive oil, and it was really delicious. You don't want to let the temperature get very high. You're not frying the fish. You're poaching it in olive oil. And the other thing about it is, yeah, you're using quite a quantity of olive oil, but you can strain that olive oil and use it again for another fish dish. You wouldn't want to use it for making something delicate like that fried egg. You would not want to fry in the fishy oil, because the oil is going to have a little fishy flavor to it. But if you wanted to fry some fish, or if you wanted to grill some fish and then dribble olive oil over it, it's perfect for that. It's a great way to cook.
And then you have some really good, some desserts, some cakes and muffins made with olive oil.
Yeah, I think there are 5 cakes in the book that are made with olive oil, and there's olive oil ice cream, and there's olive oil brownies, olive oil chocolate mousse, and olive oil cookies.
And so why should I use olive oil when I bake?
Why should you?
Why is it better?
You get a different texture, a more interesting texture, I think. It's healthier for you than butter. So you've got that going for you. I don't ever think that dessert is the healthiest part of the meal by any means. And, you know, maybe you're making a small percentage of a gain.
But it tastes good.
Yeah, and it does taste good. It tastes very good. You know, the other dessert recipe in that that's really interesting is a very authentic, they're called cevadas, and they're made in Sardinia, and they're sort of like ravioli, except they're made with a sweetened dough, and they have a ricotta filling, and then they're fried in olive oil.
So there are so many questions about olive oil. What is the misconception, do you think?
Well, I think the
most
biggest
people
misconception is that you can't cook with extra virgin olive oil. There's this myth that extra virgin olive oil has a low smoke point, or it has a low flash point, meaning it bursts into flames on your stove at a very low temperature. That's simply untrue. And I suspect that it's the canola people who are putting this out because it's so... You know, a couple of years ago, I was with a man who used to be the head of the International Olive Council, and I said to him, so how are we going to combat this mythology about not being able to cook with extra virgin olive oil? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, all over America, people say you cannot cook with extra virgin olive oil because its smoke point is so low. He said, that's crazy. And he went and he Googled, and he came back and he said, I had no idea. This is the man who's heading the hugest, most international promotion council in the world, and he didn't know that people were saying this. Olive oil's smoke point, not its flash point, because the flash point is much higher, but it starts to smoke and break down somewhere above 415 degrees Fahrenheit. Then if you go back to The Joy of Cooking and you look up deep fat frying, Irma Rombauer says the ideal temperature for deep fat frying is 360 degrees. So there you are. You've got a spread of 50 degrees, which is a big spread in cooking, between what she says is a good temperature and what the actual flash point is. So I cook everything in extra virgin olive oil. Everything.
I do too.
Yeah. And I figure that, you know, there's about 5,000 years of history of people cooking with extra virgin olive oil. And so surely they must have known something about what they were doing.
So you have so many anecdotes in your book. It's a history, and it's a travelogue. It's not just about olive oil and recipes, but is there an interesting anecdote you'd like to share about some of the people that you met?
Well, I've met so many interesting people over the years. You know, I've been working with olive oil for a very long time, and I described this in the book. When I first encountered olive oil, I mean, I grew up in Maine, and olive oil was kept in the medicine chest. It was rubbed on the baby's scalp for a kind of baby dandruff that was called cradle cap, and that's what it was used for. It was, by the way, it's a brand that's still being widely sold around the world. I can't remember the name of it, but it doesn't matter. You wouldn't want to use it anyway. So olive oil, who knew what olive oil was? I went to live in Spain in the late 1960s when Spain was still under a dictatorship, and the food production was very heavily controlled by the government. So all the olive oil was sold at a price that was established by the government, and there was no incentive to make good olive oil at all. There was just no reason to do it, because no matter what you made, the government price was what was set. So maybe you would make a little bit of really good olive oil for your family, but for the rest of it, it was rancid. There was this odor of rancid oil that arose from the neighborhood I lived in Madrid every afternoon at about 1 o'clock, when they would fire up their cooking pots, because they eat very late in Spain. And they would fire up these pots of rancid olive oil, and you would smell it all over the neighborhood. And that was olive oil to me. And then I moved to Lebanon. And there it was a completely different story, because there almost everybody got their olive oil straight from the farm, not from any kind of big distribution network. And so in the fall, when the olive oil was being produced, whole families in Beirut would go up to the family village and stock up on olive oil for the winter, bring it back down and put it in their dark, unheated cellars to keep it perfect. So that's where I discovered that olive oil was something really, really tasty and really good. And then I went to live in Italy, and that's when really it was about then that people started talking more about olive oil. And I started hearing a little bit about the health properties of it. But it really wasn't until the early 1990s that all of this health information started coming out. And that's when I got interested in the Mediterranean diet and in the role of olive oil in the Mediterranean diet, because at that time, what was thought was olive oil is a monounsaturated fat for the most part. And what that does metabolically is it tends to lower LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and stabilize HDL cholesterol. So this is a great thing. This is a good thing. You want to have it. And that was why olive oil was being promoted as part of the Mediterranean diet. And it was much, much later, as time went on, that people started discovering all the other things that were going on with extra virgin olive oil. Because that monounsaturated fat, it didn't make any difference whether the olive oil was extra virgin or just regular, pure olive oil. It was always a monounsaturated fat. But then when you look at extra virgin olive oil, you see all of these antioxidants that are in there that are doing all kinds of beneficial things in your body. They're helping to fend off various types of cancer, various coronary diseases, even Alzheimer's, even diabetes. And so it was at this point, and now we're into the late 90s, even into the aughties, and that's when olive oil really started to take off. And I kind of took off along with it because I got so excited about it all.
Well, you actually have you at your home in Italy.
In Italy,
which
yes.
is right near Umbria and
Yeah.
Tuscany on the
Yeah.
border. And you had some olive trees.
Well, I planted olive trees there. When we bought the place in 1971. And there were a dozen or so old trees that never seemed to bear much of anything. Our neighbors harvested we lived in Rome at that time because my then husband was working in Rome and my kids were going to school there. So we would come up to the farm, as we called it, for the kids' school holidays. And always the olives had been harvested and the oil had been made, and always they would give us a liter or two of what they said was our oil. And always I would wait until the neighbors were gone, and then I would tip it down the sink because it was so awful that I didn't even, it smelled of must. It didn't smell rancid. It smelled as if it had been stored in a dank earthenware. You know that kind of smell that earthenware gets when it's wet? That's what it smelled like. It was horrible.
Don't pour oil down your drain.
Yeah. So things went on like that for a while. And I finally discovered why they made such bad olive oil. They didn't think it was bad. They thought it was fine. And then I decided that I would get into it myself, so I planted 150. I didn't plant them individually myself. I had planted 150 olive trees. And about 6 or 7 years after I planted them, we started making oil. And last year we made 110 liters of olive oil. and it was really, really good olive oil, and it was a lot of fun doing it too. It wasn't just really one of those horrible farm chores that you have to do. It was fun.
So who got them all? I mean,
Well, we have various people who come to help us harvest. Now, you mentioned, or Joanne mentioned that my daughter has a restaurant in New York. So she's always surrounded by people who want to come and pick olives. Our biggest problem is fending people off, because if you get too many people in the house, it's just a party all the time, and nobody gets any work done. But
there are lots of parties in your book.
yes, there are. Well, that's because the photographer was there when we were harvesting, and she got very intrigued by the parties and took a lot of photographs. I was a little distressed with that, you know. I wanted her to focus more on the actual production of olive oil, and instead she's out there clicking all these people sitting under the trees. It looks like we toasted each other 10 or 12 times a day. But it was fun, and it is fun. So each one of those people who picks olives gets 1 or 2 or 3 liters, depending on how long they last through the harvest. And then the rest of it gets divided up between my son, my daughter, and me. She gets most of it because she has the biggest use of it. And I get some of it, and my son gets some of it. But we don't sell it because it would be too hard to sell it. We'd have to figure out how to charge for it. We'd have to figure out how to import it.
It's priceless.
That's right. It's absolutely priceless, yes. Bert Anderson, a very great writer about Italian food, who's not as well known as he ought to be. He wrote about planting his own trees and harvesting and making oil. And he said he figured that the most expensive oil in the world was the oil that he produced himself.
Well, it's like having your own garden.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
So you divide your time between Italy and Maine.
Mm-hmm.
That must be quite a transition between the two.
Oh, my dear, it takes weeks and weeks and weeks to adjust. It's partly because no matter where I go, everything is broken down while I've been gone. So, I have to go around the house and get repairs done and stuff like that.
I was thinking about the food, though.
Oh, the food. Well,
the food is so different, and how do you make those adjustments?
Well, the food is very much the same. I think one reason why people from New England love Tuscany so much is because there's a very similar attitude. They're not your usual warm, embracing Italians. They don't burst into song at the first opportunity. They're very reserved people. They love beans the way people in New England do. And the whole business about, I hate the phrase farm to table, has been so overused, but the fact is that much of the food in Maine and much of the food in Tuscany is food that comes directly from the field to the kitchen. And I think it doesn't make any difference whether you're eating broccoli grown in Maine or broccoli rabe grown in Tuscany. The treatment is very similar. I cook exactly the same way in Maine that I do in Tuscany. I do tend not to put olive oil on my baked beans, but I don't make baked beans very often anymore either. So, but it's the kind of principles of the cooking that are consistent from one place to another, and being very honest about the character of the food when it comes into the kitchen, and not dressing it up too much, just putting good food on the plate.
Well, that's how your recipes are. I was looking at your cauliflower and broccoli dish with, I think it was with lemon and capers.
Yeah.
And as I said, I made this recipe.
Yeah, that's a great recipe,
So
isn't it?
I'm wondering if I've asked a lot of questions. What about you? Do you have any questions you'd like to ask Nancy?
I've noticed that some olive oils have a sort of a peppery afterbite, and some of them are more mellow, like the Kalamata. Is that the processing, or is that the species of the olive?
It's usually the species of the olive, but it also has to do with the time when the olive is picked. If the olive is picked when it's immature, which is the best time. The Italians have a wonderful phrase for that. They call it when the olive is imbayata, which means when it's changing color from green to black. And that's when it is most full of polyphenolic compounds, i.e. antioxidants. And so if you crush olives then and make oil from it, what you're feeling in the back of your throat really is the presence of those antioxidants. There's a very interesting story that I tell in the book about a man from the Monell Institute in Philadelphia, which is an institute that investigates sensory perception and sensory awareness, but particularly of flavors and tastes. And he was in Sicily one year for a conference at a time when they were making fresh oil, and somebody gave him a thing of fresh oil, and he tasted it. And what he felt in the back of his throat was the same feeling that he knew you got from ibuprofen. Oh. And he has since determined that not that there's ibuprofen in the olive oil, but there's a substance in the olive oil that has the same physical reaction, the same metabolic reaction that ibuprofen does. They're both anti-inflammatories. And this is a big, big characteristic of extra virgin olive oil, is this anti-inflammatory, antioxidant property that it has. So it might taste more delicious to you if it doesn't have that catch in the back of the throat. But honestly, once you get used to it, that's what you look for because it is so delicious.
So just yesterday, someone gave me a bottle of Portuguese olive oil that was made from ripe olives. It was very complex. It was also, what I thought it had a really big peppery.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that oil?
Well, not with Portuguese, but I know that the French, there's a quality that's considered a defect in olive oil. It's called fustiness. And it comes about when the olives are kept too long before they're pressed. They should ideally be pressed within 24 to 48 hours of harvest, because they obviously, like most fruit, they start to deteriorate the minute they're harvested. In California, at California Olive Branch, they claim that they can produce olive oil, excuse me, they can produce oil within 2 hours of harvesting the olives. So in France, they have this tradition of keeping the olives for a while after you've harvested them. And what happens is it starts a kind of spontaneous anaerobic fermentation in these piles of blackened olives. And they make the oil from that. And that's fusty oil, and it cannot be called extra virgin because it has this major defect. But it's a defect that's wanted by the market in France. Excuse me, and I expect probably in Portugal as well.
You had a question?
You started to talk about the oil that your neighbors made for you, and you figured out what the issue was? But you didn't
It was the same thing. They had a tradition in Tuscany then among the old contadini, which is what my neighbors were, peasant farmers, of they'd harvest the olives and they'd pile them up in the farmyard and leave them for 2 weeks before they took them to the mill. And they thought that by doing that, they got more oil. They didn't, but they got less water because the olives had dried. A lot of the vegetable water that was in the olives had disappeared. So percentage-wise, yes, they got more oil, but in terms of the overall quantity of oil, they got exactly the same, and it was bad oil because of that. It was a universal practice, but if you go back and look at the Latin commentators in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century AD, Columella and people like that, when they talk about olive oil, they say it should be harvested when the olives are turning from green to black. The oil should be made immediately, and it should be stored in a cool, dark place. So they knew something that somehow these wise old peasants thought they knew better, and they didn't really.
Somebody's grandmother got behind and made up this story.
Right.
And there's a question back here.
I was just wondering, aside from the two from California that you mentioned, if there are some really outstanding favorite olive oils that you have.
What did she say?
Some outstanding olive oils from California besides the two that you mentioned.
California.
Or from anywhere, from the whole world.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of
everyone makes
outstanding olive oils made in the world, a lot. I mean, there's some fabulous oil made in Chile. There's a wonderful oil made in South Africa called Morgenster, I think is the name of it. And then all over the Mediterranean, there are great olive oils being made. There are also a lot of pretty awful olive oils being made too.
You know, I think it's like wine.
Yeah.
You have to taste and see what you like.
Absolutely.
And so you buy a bottle and then you buy another bottle and you say, I like that first bottle better. And you sort of decide what suits your palate best. And
I think one of the-
then the perfect olive oil.
One of the
for
best
you.
places to go, I mean, you can go to specialized shops like Lou DiPaolo Fine Foods in New York is a wonderful shop. And you can go there and you can taste olive oils from him, or you can go to Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor, Michigan,
yeah.
and you can taste olive oils there. But you also can buy online from both Zingerman's
Right,
and
and
DiPaolo's.
those are both two good sources.
Yes.
They have the best because Ari was on those trips sourcing.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that you get there is if with somebody like that, somebody like Ari Weinsweig who has Zingerman's, or Lou DiPaolo who has DiPaolo's Fine Foods, or another person is Beatrice Ughi at gustiamo.com. If you get an olive oil and it isn't any good, you call them up and you say, look, this olive oil you sold me is no good. They'll refund your money, or they'll explain to you why you're wrong. It really is good olive oil. But in any case, you've got. It's not like going to the supermarket and buying a bottle of Bertolli, which is, I think probably 99 times out of 100, it's not going to be very good oil.
Someone called it lamp oil.
Well, it isn't lamp oil. Lamp oil is a category in that whole, the International Olive Council has a whole list of olive oil categories, starting with extra virgin, and then virgin, and then lampante, which is lamp oil. But lampante is illegal to sell, yes.
All right, I'm very nervous now because I'm making one of your dishes for the event tomorrow night. And I don't know exactly, I'm actually making a dessert. And I understand what you're saying, when gentlemen spoke about the peppery taste. And I
Yeah.
feel like in a pastry that would just totally ruin a pastry, and I happen to be privy to more fruity olive oils,
Mm-hmm.
dip your bread and it tastes like almost a fruit. And I would want to use that in pastry.
So what you would look for in that
Suggestion
case, you would look for a Ligurian oil,
Okay,
or you would look for an Arbequina from Catalonia, or you would look for California Olive Branch, or the Chilean oil. Oli Sur is the one Chilean maker that I know
So
of.
he's flying me to Italy tonight. So
Oh, good, okay. I hope you'll be back in time for tomorrow, though. Yes.
I just want to say that I discovered last week there's an olive oil shop in Coral Gables. If you know where the old Riviera Theater was, now I think it's Area Stage. It's right next to that. You can taste the olive oils. And what I liked about it is, because I'm usually just cooking for myself, is that you can buy it in different sized bottles, and you can also buy it in very small bottles.
That's a good idea.
And what I did was I bought 4 small bottles.
Of 4
They-
different oils.
Right,
Yeah.
they just sell olive oil and balsamic vinegars, and some of the balsamic vinegars they had, you would not believe the flavors that they have there. But the best
That's
part
another book.
the best part is that you can taste them,
Yeah.
so that you
Yeah,
know
that's
exactly
terrific. That's
what you're
yeah.
getting. So I would recommend that instead of flying to Italy. It might be a little bit
Yes.
Where is that store?
Next to the Riviera Theater, what was the Riviera Theater? It's on South Dixie Highway.
It's right there on US 1, not far from Red Road. There's a little shopping center there. And they're very, very nice, and you can taste everything in the store if you want to.
Yes.
Nancy, I know there are a lot of really fabulous, wonderful olive oils in the world, but is it possible to go to the Trader Joe's or the grocery store or Costco or something and get a reasonably good olive oil?
I don't know. I can't answer that. It depends on the supermarket or the Trader Joe's or the Costco. I know that that Kirkland olive oil, that's Costco, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That came out of a study that was done at the University of California at Davis with a pretty high grade. But what that means is that the shop in which they bought the oil had a high grade. If you were to go to another Costco in Missouri, say, you might not find that the olive oil was that good because it might have been mishandled inadvertently, because the person who's managing the store, I mean, I'll give you an example. I went to a Whole Foods in Maine. It was actually when I got back from Chile and I was looking for Chilean oil, but they didn't have any Chilean oil. But they had this Sicilian oil that I know very well. It's called Olio Verde. It's made by friends of mine. It's a very good oil.
It has a date on it, too,
yes,
which I like.
And I pulled down a bottle from the high shelf, which is where it should not have been. And it was rich and dark and green and nice looking. And my son, who was with me, pulled down another bottle of the exact same oil, and it was yellow. Now, somebody had mishandled that oil so badly, and it was somebody at Whole Foods. It wasn't somebody at the producers. So you have to be really, really careful. And the reason why I recommend places like Zingerman's or DePaulo's or Market Hall Foods in Oakland is another great store. And I'm sure there are probably great stores here in the Miami area too, where you can have a personal connection with the person who's in charge of the place. So you can say to them, look at these 2 bottles of olive oil. They say on the labels that they're exactly alike, and yet it's visibly obvious that they're not exactly alike at all. But at Whole Foods, who knows who's in charge? Or at Piggly Wiggly or either other. Is that one of those down here?
Not
I think.
here.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Can you comment on all this controversy regarding olive oil and that there are olive oils being cut with cheaper oils?
Well,
Not 100%
yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. And I think a lot of it is quite dated. Because I
There
think
was an article in Sunday's New York Times.
about, oh yes, that was terrible. That was some time ago, some months ago.
No. Yes, the Sunday.
Really?
I have it right here. Is that what you saw?
Yeah, that's right.
Who wrote it?
Well, I don't know who wrote it. Was I don't know whose byline it was, but this is the person who's quoted.
Mr. Samadpour.
Well, what they said was that the USDA really has no control over the labeling, only if the olive oil company wants to have it analyzed.
Yeah.
But if they don't, they can still have the label.
Well, they can call it anything they want to, but in fact, if you are going to buy olive oil, at the supermarket level, we found that a lot of times the oil was just old and rancid. That's different from being adulterated. That's bad handling. But there were also samples labeled extra virgin that were actually a little bit of virgin olive oil mixed with refined olive oil. And again, that's adulterated, but it's not adulterated with canola oil or anything. There is a test that they run. If the olive oil is high, this is interesting, because we hear so much about omega-3s and omega-6s. If the olive oil is very high in omega-3s, that's an indication that it's been adulterated with canola oil, because canola oil is high in omega-3 and olive oil should not be. But the problem is really with these big commercial producers, and I don't want to single out Bertolli but I will say Bertolli and Carapelli and Sasso, 3 leading brands that most people think are Italian. And they're not. They're owned by a Spanish multinational, and it's mostly Spanish and North African, cheap Spanish and North African oil that goes in there. The oil is coming in from all over the place. It's being blended together, and
But they're labeling it Italian.
well, they don't always label it Italian. They may have a picture of jolly Italian peasants treading out olives with their bare feet, but they're not allowed to say it's Italian. Because it's not. What?
Or have an Italian name, but not necessarily.
But they can have an Italian name because they say, oh, but this is a historic name of our
But it's bottled in Italy.
it's
it's butter in Italy.
Not necessarily. If it's made by Bertoli, Sasso, or Carapelli, it may well be bottled in Spain, because it is a Spanish multinational called De Oleo that owns all three of these companies and several other oil. It's the largest oil producer in the world, is De Oleo. And they own, like Nestle, they own hundreds of smaller brands. But what we're talking about, two different kinds of olive oil. We're talking about big commercial products like Gallo Brothers Hardy Burgundy. And we're talking about small production, well-controlled, usually estate bottled olive oil, which is like the Chateaubriand or whatever that you might buy. And you're, in a way, you're comparing apples and oranges. Yes, there's a great deal of fraud in the big industrialized production, as there is in the industrialized production of wine, of milk, of various types of cheese, et cetera, et cetera. And it's true that USDA has no controls over this. In fact, the only company that ever got a USDA seal that it was makes some really awful olive oil, but it was all regular as far as so this is another big problem. I mean, I can talk about this for hours and hours and hours. Another big problem is that these parameters that I mentioned, 0.8% free oleic fatty acid and 20 MEP of peroxides, are way far above what any conscientious producer of good olive oil wants. Most of the olive oil producers I know want their oil to be 0.1 or at most 0.2% free oleic acid and 6 or 7 MEPs, whatever they are, of peroxide. So legally, an extra virgin olive oil can have this really high register. And for that reason, it's not a very good oil. But the International Olive Council, which is an industry-promoted group, even though it's part of the UN, is anxious because, they get money out of all of these people. That's what builds them the 16-story building that they have in the heart of Madrid. So they don't want to rock the boat, the olive oil boat. They want to keep promoting olive oil from places like Tunisia and Morocco. And again, there are some very fine oils produced in Tunisia and Morocco, but there's a lot of what we might call rot gut oil produced there too. Yes?
When you talk about fine olive oil, are you disqualifying olive oils that are a mixture of, let's Spanish and Tunisia? It has to be a pure locale?
I think it does, in order to guarantee that it's going to be high quality. Okay. Because the minute you start mixing those things in, you're losing control over the production. I mean, you can't have a bunch of guys or girls in Tunisia and another bunch in Turkey and a third bunch in the south of Spain, all controlling that it's going to be really fine olive oil and put it all together. It's like any good food product is usually produced by a very small entity, even by an individual person, rather than by a consortium. What happens in Spain? Spain, when under Franco, started planting massive, massive, massive quantities of olive trees. So much so that you can stand in some parts of the country on a high hill, and as far as you can see under the clear blue Andalusian sky, there is nothing but olive trees. And all of those olive trees are producing olives at about the same time. And all of those olives are being rushed into these big mills, and the big mills can't handle all of it, so they're racketing night and day as fast as they can go to produce olive oil in very sloppy ways. And it all gets bunged in together into a cooperative of some sort. Because most of the Spanish oil is produced by cooperatives, and it's a guarantee that it's not going to be if it is high quality, it's an anomaly. It's just impossible to produce high quality at that level. I mean, you can go to the International House of Pancakes and get, pancakes that are flipped over, that are made from some kind of processed batter that comes in, and they're not going to be as good as the pancakes your grandmother made. Because she was like my grandmother. She knew how to combine good milk and good butter and good eggs and good flour, and to tend each pancake as an individual.
Well, I say that because there are some very fine wines that are a blend of multiple wines. I just
Well,
wondered if
there's
it
a
was
difference.
equivalent with olive oil.
They're not a blend of wines that come from Tunisia and Turkey and Morocco and Spain. They're a blend like Tuscan wines are always, I mean, a true DOP Chianti Classico or Chianti is a blend of 3 different types of wine, and often they're wines that are made in 3 separate batches and then blended at the winery. Same thing happens with Tuscan olive oil. Tuscan olive oil is also a blend of Moraiolo, Pendolino, Lecchino, and Frantoio olives. They all grow together out in the fields, and they're all harvested at the same time. And when I talk about a blend, I mean a blend of olive oils from many different places coming together, not a blend of different varieties.
Okay.
Yes?
Is there any significance to the terms cold press in first harvest?
It's a phrase that has very little meaning. All extra virgin oil is cold pressed in the sense that no heat is applied to it, because if heat is applied, it immediately disqualifies it as extra virgin, and it probably ruins and damages the flavor of the oil too. It's a food writer's term. It used to be a term that was used because in the old days, before the invention of modern technology for producing olive oil, you would have a first cold pressing, and then once that was taken away, you might pour hot water over the olive paste to extract the rest of the oil, but that doesn't really exist any longer.
And
yes.
wasn't the term extra virgin only coined in the 70s as a marketing tool?
Well, that's what people say, but I think, in fact, it may be that's true. I'm not sure of that. I have to ask Fausto Luchetti.
Virginity, that book.
Right, yeah.
Thomas
yeah.
Mueller.
Yeah. Does he say that it was a term that came
that's where I read
because virgin oil was always used to describe the oil it wasn't produced with that was produced by mechanical means. But extra virgin, it may be that it was produced to indicate an oil that met those higher parameters than just chefs talk all the time about how they use virgin oil for cooking and extra virgin for garnishing. And I say to them, oh, that's so interesting. Where do you get virgin olive oil? Well, at the store. Well, that's interesting because I've been in many, many stores in Italy and Spain and France and the United States, and I have never seen a bottle of virgin olive oil except that French oil that I was talking about earlier. Yes?
Like wines can be drunk. You can drink them young. You can age them in olive oil if you keep it properly. How long can it?
Well, conventionally we say 2 years. But in fact, if the oil has been stored properly, I've had a taste of oil that was 8 years old. It was actually found in a terracotta bin in the basement, the deep basement of a palazzo in Sicily. And they had forgotten that it was there. And we tasted it, and it tasted just fine. But conventionally, we say that the fresher the olive oil, the better it is.
Is
the
it more
more
complex fresher and becomes less complex?
it becomes less complex. It loses a lot of the interesting, and I think it probably loses a lot of the polyphenols as a result of that as well.
And it also can taste rancid.
Well, if it's exposed to in a way that creates rancidity, it certainly can. Yes.
Is there organic olive oil? Does that mean anything?
Yes, it does. It's very easy to produce organic olive oil. At least it has been until last summer. Olive trees don't require a great deal of chemical inputs, either as fertilizer or as sprays on the trees. And so a lot of olive producers don't even bother to go for organic certification, because what I would look for, let's go back to this business about buying olive oil. What are you going to look for when you go into the store? There are several things to look for. Number one, do not buy an oil that comes in a clear glass bottle. That is the first rule of olive oil, because clear glass, obviously, light penetrates and it destroys the olive oil. Look at the label. read the label carefully, and especially if there is a harvest date, not a bottling date and not a use by date, but a harvest date. That's a very good indication of a good olive oil. Then look for organic certification and look for denomination of protected origin, DOP, or in Spain it's DO, and in Greece I'm not sure what it is, but it's that. It's like wine. It's like an appellation contrôlée for wine. It shows you that the olive oil has been produced under certain strict regulations that are maintained in that one district. So it has to be made from certain varieties. They have to be picked at a certain time. They have to be processed in a certain way, and they have to be stored in a certain way. So those are all guarantees of the quality of olive oil. Again, it could be that the olive oil has been mishandled since it left the producer. But at least you start looking for something that can give you an indication of quality.
I have a question.
Yes.
What country do you like the olive oil from?
What?
What country? Italy or?
Oh, Italy, Tuscany. Tuscany produces the best oil in the world.
Specific area, Tuscany?
Well, I kind of like the oil that comes from the hills around Arezzo, but that's not the only place. There are other places in Tuscany. Actually, I'm joking. Umbria produces very good oil. There's some fabulous oils coming from Sicily now. And if you like a very mild oil, Ligurian oil is fine. I don't happen to care for it myself because I like the intense Tuscan flavor. But I know one oil that's produced up in the Veneto, north of Verona, in the hills up there, from a very obscure olive that produces an oil. It has a slightly citrus flavor to it, even though no citrus has been added to it.
There's a
Yes.
question.
You mentioned earlier comparing two bottles on the same label. One was yellow and one was dark green.
Yeah.
Should one look for dark green olive oil?
Well, yeah, I think probably you're safer looking for that. I mean, yellow olive oil usually is well past its prime. But it's true, too, that if olive oil is made from riper olives, it tends to have more of a gold cast to it. And if it's made from very unripe olives, it tends to be deep green. But that can vary a lot, too.
So deep green is what you should look for.
Deep
as a
green is what
general
I
rule.
would always look for because that's the flavor that I love in olive oil. It's a kind of raw, grassy artichoke flavor that's terrific.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Do you tend to have a lot of different kinds of olive oil for different kinds of cooking you're doing?
Yeah, I have a sign in my kitchen that says, "Do not touch these olive oils. They are here for tasting." Because my children will come in and just, empty them into the frying pan and throw in an egg or two. I have a lot of different olive oils, but that's because people send me oils because they know that I'm interested and that I can help to promote an obscure oil, or I can give them advice about an oil, something like that. But I think for most people, I would say 2 or 3 oils maximum is plenty. Yes.
How many oils does your daughter have in her restaurant?
Well, interestingly, she has our oil from our, which goes out to favored customers. And she has an oil called Iliada, which is a Greek oil that she uses for an all-purpose cooking oil. And she buys it in 5-liter tins. And then for the rest of it, I don't know exactly what she uses. Yes, ma'am.
Nancy, what is it about refrigeration that you don't particularly like, except in Florida where there are no basements?
Well, what the olive oil producers say is that it will, the condensation inside the bottle will drip back into the oil and spoil it. So that's a real reason to keep away from refrigeration. And of course, it does harden the olive oil, and you have to leave it out. But when I go back to my house in Tuscany, which is a frigid stone cottage, and the oil is stored in the cantina in the dark and the cold, it can take days and days of leaving the cantina door open before that olive oil that's in the fusto starts to warm up enough that I can actually tap it out of the tin that it's in.
Now, is the tin? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Nothing leaches out of the tin.
I'm sorry?
Nothing leaches out of the tin versus
No,
water?
no, I don't think so. I mean, you don't taste it certainly, and you know maybe there are BPA's and all. Who knows what's in there? Actually, BPA's are allowed in Europe. It's only here in America that they're considered horrendous. Europeans say, what's the problem? And I don't know who's right, but you had a question back there.
Yeah, I do not condone this, but what do you think about flavored olive oil?
I think it's disgusting.
I'm curious because I love to see like truffled extra virgin.
Oh, please, that's the worst of all. I mean, Persian lime is bad enough, but white truffle oil is just... No, I feel the same way about flavored coffee. I don't want coffee that tastes of Frangelico. I want coffee that tastes of coffee. And if I want to put a couple of drops of Frangelico in it mistakenly, I can do that, but I control the flavor. And I think that white truffle oil is one of the biggest scams that's ever been promoted because it's not really even a truffle that's in there.
Chemicals.
Yeah. So.
And then my other question was that DOP that you were talking about, that would sort of be like that stamp that's put on balsamic vinegar that you know that...
Well, balsamic vinegar, the balsamico that they're selling at that shop is not really balsamico. It's not, they do have some aceto balsamico tradizionale di Modena or di Reggio Emilia. But anything else is basically vinegar to which some caramel has been added, and it could be absolutely delicious, but it's not, you know, we have this habit in this country of just dumping balsamico all over everything, and it's kind of different. Again, it's like bad money driving out good. It's Gresham's law, isn't it? The bad balsamico has driven out the good stuff. Mind you, the good stuff costs $60 for a tiny little bottle. Yeah.
Are you kidding? When was the last time you bought it?
Anyway.
Thank you, Nancy.
Oh, you're welcome. We really have.
Hi, we're off the air now. Oh, we're still on. I wanted to recognize the president of Les Dames, Dorothy Rubin, and the president of Slow Food Miami, Michelle Benesh. And I believe she's got some flyers. If you haven't had enough tonight, and I hope you haven't, I hope you're certainly going to buy Nancy's book, and that'll answer some of the questions you didn't get to tonight. She's happy to autograph. And there are some seats available still for tomorrow night when you'll get to taste some of the recipes and mingle with Nancy with some of your other questions.
Yes. Folks, if there are no more questions, we have Virgin Territory as well as some of Nancy's previous titles for sale at the counter in the front room over there. She's going to be signing over there at the table to my left. So I want to thank our friends from La Dame d'Escoffier and Slow Food Miami. I want to thank our introducer, our friend Ms. Joanne Bander. Thanks to our interviewer this evening, Ms. Carol Kotkin. And please, let's give another big hand to Nancy Harmon Jenkins. Thanks very much.